The story you are about to hear is one born from jealousy, a force so corrosive, so quietly destructive, that it can hollow out a person's conscience and twist love into something unrecognizable. It is the kind of jealousy that blinds, that festers, that pushes an ordinary human being across the border into unimaginable cruelty. That same force would come to engulf a woman living in Costa Rica, a woman whose thirst for possession and control sparked one of the country's most shocking modern crimes. To understand how the tragedy unfolded, to understand why the case of Gerardo Cruz would echo through the nation, we need to go back to the beginning, back to the woman who would become the center of this storm. Her name was Samady Fonseca, born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Almost nothing is known about her early life, except that she grew up in an area called Cuba, where she lived alone with her mother, Sonia. Even as a young girl, classmates and neighbors remembered her as difficult, temperamental, stubborn to the point of being confrontational. She didn't tolerate rejection. She didn't accept no. When she wanted something, she took it, whether through charm, lies, or sheer force of will. Her striking looks and carefully cultivated figure drew attention everywhere she went, and she wielded that allure with precision, using beauty as leverage. But while she could attract men with startling ease, she could not keep them. Her vanity, greed, and boundless jealousy drove suitors away almost as quickly as they arrived. In her late teens and early 20s, Samady's doll-like looks earned her a small local fame. She worked as a real-life Barbie in a large bookstore chain called Universal. The nickname stuck. To many, she appeared like a living figurine, beautiful, delicate, perfectly styled, but beneath the surface lay a personality capable of sharp manipulation. Soon after finishing high school, she entered a relationship with a well-known television journalist, Osvaldo Fernando Belleri, a man more than 16 years older than she was. Despite the turbulent nature of their relationship, this was the longest partnership she ever maintained. They had 2 children together, a son named Christopher and a daughter, Christina. Yet even with a growing family, Samady's jealousy and erratic behavior repeatedly tore at the bond. Eventually, after years of conflict, Belleri walked away, but his departure did not end the drama. In 2012, Osvaldo died unexpectedly at the age of 53 and left nothing to Samady in his will. She refused to accept this. Consumed with indignation, she took matters into her own hands. She stormed his home, seized the property, changed the locks, and stripped the place of valuables that did not belong to her. His relatives immediately took legal action. Police were forced to remove her from the home, yet mysteriously, no criminal charges were filed. It wouldn't be the last time Samady slipped through cracks in the system. Her romantic life continued its chaotic pattern. She became involved with another man, Miguel Angel Perez, and had a 3rd child, a daughter named Maria. Whether they were legally married remains uncertain. Different accounts contradict one another. Yet what is certain is that the relationship ended in bitterness, and that she gave the child Perez's surname without his consent, later using forged documents to claim financial support. It was one of many small cons tucked into a broader pattern of deception. More unsettling, however, were the whispers circulating in the community about what happened to some of her former lovers. One boyfriend vanished without a trace soon after attempting to break off their relationship. Another ex, named Diaco, was found murdered in a staged robbery, the killers never identified. Though nothing was ever proven, locals could not shake the feeling that these tragedies were more than coincidences. This brings us to the man whose fate would place Samady at the center of a national firestorm. Gerardo Cruz. Born in December 1992 in San Jose, Gerardo grew up in a quiet, stable environment. Though his biological father abandoned the family before his birth, his stepfather, Hermes Rodriguez, raised him as his own. Gerardo loved motorcycles, loved joking with friends, and fell deeply in love at a young age with a girl named Carol. At 23, he moved with Carol and their small daughter, Genesis, into the home of his aunt and uncle in San Sebastian. He worked hard at a local bakery, determined to provide for his growing family. Life at that moment appeared promising. Carol was pregnant with their second child, and Gerardo seemed grounded and content. Everything changed in the summer of 2015, when Samady walked into the bakery. She was 40, but still attractive, still confident in her allure, still dressed to draw eyes in every room she entered. The nearly 20-year age difference between them meant little to her. Men, especially younger men, were conquests, symbols of power she could collect like trophies. To Gerardo, flattered by the attention, curious, impulsive, she was an intoxicating escape. What began as flirtation quickly escalated into a passionate, secret affair. Samady began stopping by the bakery almost daily, arriving in bold outfits, sometimes with her 19-year-old daughter Christina in tow, her presence impossible to ignore. Employees noticed, neighbors noticed. Soon enough, rumors spread. Gerardo believed he could control the situation, balance his quiet family life with Carol while indulging in the dangerous thrill of a hidden romance, and he might have succeeded had he not started boasting. The young man confided in friends, bragging about Samady's beauty, about her gifts, about the intensity of their relationship. Word trickled back to his mother, who confronted him, pleading with him to end the affair before it destroyed his home. Eventually, the lie collapsed. In October 2015, Samady learned he not only had a partner, but a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Something inside her snapped. She exploded into fury. She called Carol, insulted her, threatened her. She told Gerardo that if he didn't belong entirely to her, then he would belong to no one. And yet, Gerardo underestimated her completely. He apologized to Carol, begged forgiveness, and moved on, assuming that Samady would calm down, find someone new, and forget the whole thing. He could not have been more wrong. In the days that followed, a strange twist of fate placed Gerardo in the public eye. Walking through downtown San Jose, he spotted an older man secretly filming under a young woman's skirt. Outraged, Gerardo pulled out his phone, confronted the man, filmed him, and later uploaded the footage online. Overnight, the video went viral. Costa Ricans were outraged. Journalists interviewed him. Television and radio shows hosted him. Social networks hailed him as a hero, standing up against harassment. The man he had exposed was identified as Luis Solis Delgado, a former finance ministry official. Soon, powerful lawyers hired by Delgado began attacking Gerardo, threatening legal action for releasing the video. But amidst this whirlwind of sudden fame, Gerardo had no idea he was walking straight toward the deadliest trap of his life, one quietly laid by a woman consumed by jealousy and humiliation, a woman for whom losing control was unforgivable. As the aftermath of the crime settled into a grim, unshakable reality, the people closest to the tragedy found themselves drifting through days that felt strangely muted, as though every sound, every conversation, and every routine gesture carried an invisible weight that pressed against their ribs and slowed their breathing. Even those who had known only fragments of the story could not help feeling the ripple of unease that spread quietly through the community, because a crime like this did not simply occur and fade. It seeped into the rhythm of daily life, into the way neighbors regarded one another, into the anxious glances exchanged when the smallest disagreement lingered a moment too long. For many, the worst part was the creeping sense that the entire chain of events might have been avoided had someone understood earlier the depth of the emotional fracture growing beneath the surface. Friends of Samady repeated the same memories in circles, recalling how she had begun to move through her routines like an actor performing a role she no longer wished to play, how her silences had stretched longer, how her once bright presence had dimmed into a kind of brittle endurance that none of them had dared to question too deeply. They wondered endlessly whether a single conversation, a single gesture of concern might have steered her away from the spiraling despair that eventually consumed her. But grief, they came to understand, is a labyrinth, one in which the person suffering may wander so far inward that even the closest companions cannot see the turns they take until it is much too late. At the same time, those who had loved Gerardo found themselves haunted by memories that returned in sudden jarring flashes. The tone of his voice in the final weeks, the tired but hopeful way he spoke about wanting to resolve the tension, the subtle resignation that had crept into his manner even as he tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. People remembered how he had begun leaving gatherings earlier, how he had seemed distracted in conversations, and how he had often looked toward the future with a mixture of apprehension and determination, as though he believed that with enough patience and goodwill, everything would eventually settle. The tragedy of his optimism, its quiet, earnest vulnerability, became a source of torment for those who survived him, because they could not help replaying every moment in which his discomfort had surfaced, wondering whether he had sensed the danger growing but refused to give it form by speaking it aloud. His family described how he had always been the sort of person who tried to solve problems without burdening others, someone who believed that time and empathy were stronger than anger. And this belief, so admirable in its gentleness, now stood like a painful monument to the innocence with which he faced emotional storms that had already gathered too much force to be calmed. The investigators, who had walked through the tangled threads of motives, emotions, and missed signals, often remarked among themselves how the case seemed to exist in two separate worlds: the visible sequence of events, cleanly documented in messages and timelines, and the invisible emotional terrain that no report could adequately capture. They understood that the violence itself was sudden, but the path to that moment had been long, winding, and shaped by fears and insecurities that had silently intensified until they warped perception and eroded self-control. One detective described the story as a slow implosion, a collapse that began quietly at the edges, where small doubts and resentments whispered to themselves before advancing relentlessly toward the center of a life already weakened by grief. Another remarked that what made the case so haunting was not only the brutality of the act, but the ache of inevitability that lingered around it, as if every person involved had been pulled forward by emotional currents they neither recognized nor resisted until it was far too late. And in their private moments, even the most seasoned officers admitted that they carried pieces of the case with them long after the paperwork was filed, because behind every detail was a reminder of how easily human vulnerability can twist into tragedy when left unaddressed. In the broader community, the story settled into a kind of collective cautionary tale, retold not with sensationalism, but with a solemn awareness of how fragile the boundary can be between ordinary life and irrevocable loss. People spoke about the dangers of unspoken pain, the way unresolved emotions could distort everything they touched, and the importance of recognizing when someone's sorrow had hardened into something darker and more volatile. Counselors and educators used the case as an example in discussions about mental health and toxic relationships, emphasizing how isolation, grief, and emotional dependency can create a pressure that eventually ruptures in catastrophic ways. But even these efforts, noble as they were, could not fully soothe the lingering ache carried by those who had known the individuals at the heart of the story. Their grief was not abstract. It lived in the empty seats at gatherings, the unanswered messages left in old conversations, the birthdays and holidays that arrived like quiet reminders of the life that had been violently severed. In the end, long after the verdict was announced and the legal process concluded, the true aftermath of the tragedy remained in the private spaces where memory and regret continued to circulate like a slow, persistent tide. For some, healing came gradually, shaped by time, reflection, and the support of others. For others, healing meant learning to live with questions that would never have satisfying answers. And though the world around them eventually returned to its usual pace, the people forever connected to the case carried within them a deeper understanding of how swiftly the human heart can be led astray when fear, longing, and pain eclipse reason. The story became, for all who heard it, a reminder not only of the devastating consequences of unchecked despair, but of the tender, fragile nature of the emotional bonds that shape our lives, bonds that, when strained beyond their limits, can unravel in ways that leave scars long after the final chapter has been written.